The billionaire stayed up all night beside the sick little girl. What happened next changed his life forever. Hey, stop scrolling for a second. I need you to hear this one till the very end, because I promise you, it's not what you think it is. A billionaire. A sick 3-year-old girl who wasn't even his daughter. And one single night that broke him open in a way 10 years of therapy never could. Everyone in that mansion thought he was heartless. Cold. A man who hadn't smiled since the day his world fell apart. But that night, when the maid's little girl spiked a fever no one could bring down, he didn't call an ambulance and walk away like everyone expected. He knelt beside her bed. And he stayed. What he found out by morning didn't just change her life. It shattered everything he thought he knew about his own. Stay with me. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we dive in, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. And hey, if you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button. We tell stories like this every single week, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends. Okay. Grab something warm to drink, get comfortable, and let's begin. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days, and neither had Alexander Cole. At 34, he was the youngest man to ever sit at the head of Cole Global Holdings, a company his father had built from nothing and Alexander had turned into an empire spanning 4 continents. His name appeared on magazine covers with words like visionary and untouchable beside it. What the magazines never printed was the truth sitting quietly underneath all of it, that Alexander Cole hadn't truly laughed in 6 years and hadn't let anyone close enough to notice. His mansion on the hill overlooking the city was the kind of place people photographed from the gates, never realizing how empty a house that big could feel. 16 rooms. 2 of them, he never opened. Maria Delgado had worked there for almost a year. She was 31, quiet in the way people become when life has asked too much of them too early, and she moved through the house like a shadow that made things better wherever it passed. She dusted the untouched piano in the east wing. She kept fresh flowers in rooms Alexander never entered. And every evening, when her shift technically ended, she'd walk the long driveway down to the small staff cottage at the edge of the property, where her daughter waited. Lily was 3 years old, with dark curls that never stayed in their ribbon and a laugh that carried through walls. She was, by every account from the household staff, the only genuinely happy thing on that entire estate. The gardener saved her ladybugs in jars. The cook slipped her extra cookies when Maria wasn't looking. Even Mr. Whitfield, the stone-faced head of security, had been seen, just once, letting her arrest him with a pair of plastic handcuffs. Alexander had seen the child maybe 4 times in passing. A blur of yellow dress disappearing around a corner. He'd never spoken to her. He made a point of not speaking to her, actually, though if you'd asked him why, he wouldn't have had an honest answer ready. The honest answer was upstairs, behind one of those 2 locked doors. 6 years ago, Alexander had a daughter. Her name was Ellie. She would have been 4 this past spring. There had been a car, and a rain-slicked road much like the one outside tonight, and a decision Alexander had made to stay late at the office instead of driving his wife and daughter home himself. He had told himself that story every night since, rearranging the details, searching for the version where he arrives 10 minutes earlier and none of it happens. He never found that version. He only found the empty nursery he couldn't bring himself to empty, and a company that grew larger every year he poured himself into it instead of anyone else. So when a small girl's laughter drifted up from the garden some afternoons, Alexander closed his window. It wasn't cruelty. Staff who'd worked for him long enough understood that. It was self-preservation, the kind that calcifies over years into something that looks exactly like coldness from the outside. Maria didn't know the full story. She knew only what the older housekeeper, Dolores, had quietly told her during her first week. Don't take it personally, he's not always been like this, something happened. Maria had nodded, filed it away, and gone on doing her work with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything, grateful simply for the paycheck that kept a roof over her daughter's head after her husband had left them 18 months ago without so much as a note. Tonight, the rain was heavier than usual, drumming against the cottage roof as Maria tucked Lily into bed. The little girl's cheeks were pink, too pink, Maria thought, brushing damp curls from her forehead. She pressed the back of her hand to Lily's skin and felt a heat that hadn't been there that morning. "Mama, my head feels funny," Lily mumbled, already half asleep. "I know, baby. Drink your water. You'll feel better in the morning." Maria said it the way tired mothers say things they need to be true. She had a headache tablet in the cabinet, a thermometer that read 100.4, and a night shift she still technically owed the house because a dinner party had run late. She made a decision that felt small at the time. She would check on Lily in an hour, finish turning down the guest rooms, and everything would be fine by morning. She had no way of knowing that an hour would become the longest night of her life, or that the man in the house who'd never once spoken to her daughter was about to become the only reason that little girl made it through till dawn. Somewhere above them, in a study lined with books he never read anymore, Alexander Cole poured a drink he wouldn't finish and stared out at the storm, utterly unaware that his entire life was about to turn on a fever that hadn't yet peaked. By 11 p.m., Lily wasn't just warm. She was burning. Maria found her tangled in the sheets, cheeks flushed a deep, alarming red, her small body trembling despite the heat radiating off her skin. The thermometer read 103.6. Maria's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. "Lily. Lily, baby, look at Mama." The little girl's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, then closed again. A whimper. Nothing more. Every instinct in Maria's body screamed at once. Her car, an old sedan with a check engine light that had been on for months, was parked at the bottom of the hill, a 15-minute walk in weather that was currently trying to drown the entire estate. The nearest hospital was 25 minutes away, even in good conditions. She had no one to call. Her sister was 3 states away. Lily's father hadn't answered a phone call in over a year. She did the only thing she could think to do. She wrapped Lily in a blanket, scooped her up, heavier than she should have felt, or maybe Maria was just that afraid, and ran. She ran through the rain, up the gravel drive, past the topiary hedges she trimmed every Tuesday, toward the only lit window in the entire main house. Dolores answered the side door first, took one look at Maria's face and the child in her arms, and didn't ask a single question. She led her straight through the kitchen, up the back stairs, toward the one place in the house she knew someone would still be awake. Alexander heard the commotion before he saw them. Footsteps, a voice cracking with panic, Dolores calling his name in a tone she never used. He was on his feet before he'd even decided to stand. The study door opened, and there was Maria, soaked to the bone, cradling a small girl whose face he recognized in flashes he hadn't let himself look at directly in 6 years. Not because she resembled Ellie, not really, but because she was a child, burning up, limp in her mother's arms, and something in Alexander's chest cracked open before his mind caught up to his body. "She has a fever, sir. I'm so sorry. I know it's late. Maria's voice broke. "The car won't make it in this storm, and I don't know what else to." "Give her to me." The words came out before Alexander understood he'd said them. Maria hesitated for exactly 1 second, the instinct of a mother who'd learned not to trust easily, before something in his face made her step forward and place her daughter into his arms. Lily weighed nothing. That was the first thing he noticed, an absurd, useless thought in the middle of a crisis, but it landed somewhere deep and old inside him. She felt like a fever dream of a memory he'd spent 6 years trying not to have. "Dolores, get the car around front. Not the sedan, the SUV, it handles the roads better in this weather." "Maria, is she allergic to anything?" No, sir, nothing that I know of." "Then we go now." What happened over the next 40 minutes would later become, in Alexander Cole's own private accounting of his life, the moment everything changed, though he wouldn't have been able to say that yet, not while he was sitting in the back of a moving SUV with a stranger's daughter's head against his shoulder, one hand pressed to her burning forehead, the other gripping Maria's hand without either of them quite noticing he'd taken it. Traffic lights blurred past in streaks through the rain-smeared windows. Alexander's driver, A steady man named Frank, who'd worked for the family for over a decade, kept glancing in the rearview mirror at a version of his employer he had genuinely never seen before. A man leaning forward, murmuring something low and constant to a feverish toddler, the way you'd talk someone through a panic attack. "You're okay. You're okay. Almost there." At the hospital, Alexander didn't wait in any line. He didn't have to. Doors opened for the Cole name the way they always had, but for the first time in 6 years, he actually noticed doors opening, actually felt grateful for the privilege instead of numb to it, because it meant Lily was in an exam room within 90 seconds instead of 90 minutes. A nurse took her temperature, 104.1, and the word that left her mouth made both Alexander and Maria go still. "We need to admit her. Now." Maria's knees nearly gave out. Alexander caught her elbow before she fully realized she was falling, and in that motion, a billionaire steadying his maid in a hospital hallway at midnight, something shifted permanently between two people who, 6 hours earlier, had never exchanged more than a passing nod in a hallway. Neither of them left that building for the next 11 hours. The pediatric ward at St. Auburn Memorial ran quiet after midnight, lit by the low hum of monitors and the occasional squeak of a nurse's shoes on linoleum. Room 214 held one small bed, one 4-pole, and 2 adults who had, by 1 a.m., stopped being employer and employee and become simply 2 frightened people keeping vigil over a child. The doctor's early assessment wasn't reassuring. A possible infection, blood cultures sent off, fluids running, fever refusing to break despite the medication working through Lily's small system. "We'll know more in a few hours," the resident said, in the careful, non-committal tone doctors use when they genuinely don't know yet either. Maria sat in the chair beside the bed, gripping Lily's small hand like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Alexander stood by the window at first, the way he stood at the edge of every room he entered, keeping distance out of habit. But somewhere around 2 a.m., when Lily whimpered in her sleep and reached out blindly for something to hold, it was Alexander's hand she found first. Maria's had slipped away for a moment to answer the nurse's question, and the little girl's fingers curled around his without either of them planning it. He didn't pull away. He sat down in the second chair, the fever-warm hand of a stranger's daughter wrapped around his finger, and something inside Alexander Cole that had been sealed shut for 6 years quietly, irreversibly, began to open. "You don't have to stay, sir," Maria said softly. "Sometime after 3 a.m. I know you have a company to run in the morning. I can call Dolores, she can." "I'm staying." He said it too fast, too firmly, and Maria looked at him with the kind of question in her eyes she was too polite to ask out loud. "Why does this matter to you? Why is a man who's never spoken a word to my daughter sitting here at 3 in the morning holding her hand like his life depends on it?" Alexander answered anyway. Not because he owed her an explanation, but because 6 years of silence had become, in the space of a single night, unbearable to carry alone in a room this small. "I had a daughter," he said, staring at Lily's small chest rising and falling. "Ellie. She was 3. My wife was driving her home from her grandmother's the night it happened. I was supposed to pick them up myself, but I stayed late at the office. There was an accident. I was 20 minutes away, and by the time I got there..." He stopped. Started again. "I've never sat with a sick child since. I couldn't. I told myself it was because it would be too painful. Tonight I understand it was because I was punishing myself. Staying away from anything that reminded me of her felt like the only control I had left." Maria's eyes filled, not with pity, Alexander would have hated pity, but with something closer to recognition. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. I'm the one who should apologize. To you, and to her." He looked down at Lily's hand around his finger. "I've walked past your daughter in the garden a dozen times and never once said hello. I told myself I was being professional. I was being a coward." It was the most honest thing Alexander Cole had said to another human being in half a decade, and it came out at 3:40 in the morning, in a hospital chair, holding hands with a sick toddler who didn't know she was the reason a locked door somewhere inside him had finally cracked open. Maria didn't respond with words right away. She simply reached over and, for a moment, rested her free hand over both of theirs, his and Lily's, a small, wordless gesture that said more than any sentence could have. That was the turn. Not the fever, not the ambulance ride, not even the diagnosis still hours away. It was this, a grieving father allowing himself, for the first time since the worst night of his life, to sit beside a child in a hospital bed and not run from it. But the night wasn't finished testing him yet. At 4:15 a.m., the monitor beside Lily's bed began to alarm. The sound cut through the quiet room like a blade, a sharp, rhythmic beeping that brought two nurses running before Alexander had even fully processed what was happening. Lily's small body had begun to shake, her back arching slightly, eyes rolling back. "Febrile seizure," one nurse said calmly to the other, already moving Lily onto her side, clearing the space around her. "Get the doctor. Now." Maria made a sound Alexander would never forget for the rest of his life. A raw, wordless cry that came from somewhere beneath language, the sound of a mother watching her child's body do something no mother should ever have to witness. He caught her before she collapsed against the bed rail, holding her upright with both arms while the medical team worked with the fast, practiced calm of people who had done this before but never made it feel routine. "She's okay, she's going to be okay, these usually pass in under a minute," the resident said, stopwatch in hand, counting seconds that felt to both Alexander and Maria like hours. It passed in 51 seconds. It felt like 51 years. Afterward, Lily lay still and pale against the pillow, breathing evenly again, the immediate danger over but the fear it left behind sitting heavy in the room like smoke that wouldn't clear. The doctor, an older woman with kind, tired eyes, explained gently that febrile seizures, while terrifying to witness, were relatively common in young children and usually not dangerous on their own. But they still needed to find the source of the infection driving the fever, and quickly. "We're running a full panel," she said. "We'll have preliminary blood work back within the hour." Maria sank into the chair beside the bed, her whole body trembling, and for the first time that night, she let herself cry, not the controlled, silent tears of someone trying to hold it together for her child's sake, but real, shoulder-shaking sobs of a mother who had just watched the worst 10 minutes of her life happen to the person she loved most in the world. Alexander didn't think. He simply knelt beside her chair and put his arms around her, and Maria, exhausted, terrified, stripped of every professional wall she'd carefully maintained for a year, let herself be held by the man whose house she cleaned every day of her working life. "I've got you," he said quietly. "Both of you. I'm not going anywhere." It wasn't a romantic gesture, not in that moment. It was simpler and, in its own way, larger than that. It was one broken person recognizing another and refusing, for once, to look away. By 6 a.m., the preliminary blood work came back, a bacterial infection, treatable, aggressive but caught in time. With 4 antibiotics started immediately. The fever that had spiked to a dangerous 104.1 only hours earlier was already, slowly, beginning to drop. The doctor's face, when she delivered the update, held the particular relief of someone who knew how differently that night could have ended. "She's going to be fine," the doctor said. "You got her here just in time. Another few hours and this could have looked very different." Maria pressed both hands to her mouth. Alexander closed his eyes and, for the second time in 6 years, allowed himself to feel something all the way through instead of shutting it down halfway. By 8 a.m., Lily's color had returned. Her fever had broken. And when she finally opened her eyes, really opened them, awake and lucid for the first time since midnight, the first thing she did was look past her mother, directly at Alexander, and ask in a small, scratchy voice, "Are you my friend now?" Something about the simplicity of the question, the total absence of any awareness of who he was or what his name meant to the rest of the world, undid Alexander Cole completely. He had to look away for a moment before he trusted his voice. "Yeah," he finally said. "I think I am." But even as relief filled the room, a new complication was already forming. One that had nothing to do with fevers or infections, and everything to do with what happens when the richest, most guarded man in the city is photographed by an off-duty nurse with a phone camera, carrying his housekeeper's sick daughter into a hospital at midnight. By the time Alexander and Maria left the hospital that morning, the photo was already spreading. The headline hit by noon: Coal Empire CEO's secret late-night hospital visit. Who is the mystery child? By 3 p.m., 3 more outlets had run their own versions. By evening, it wasn't just gossip columns, it was the company's board. Alexander hadn't even had time to sleep before his phone was flooded with calls from Coal Global's senior leadership, chief among them his father's oldest business partner and now board chairman, Richard Voss, a man who had never once in 6 years asked Alexander how he was actually doing, but had plenty to say now that the family name was trending online. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Voss's voice cracked through the speakerphone in Alexander's office that afternoon, sharp and clipped. A grieving billionaire, unmarried, photographed in the middle of the night with his housekeeper and her child? The press is already speculating about an affair. About your judgment. About whether you're fit to lead this company through the merger next quarter. Her daughter almost died last night, Alexander said, his voice dangerously flat. I stayed because a 3-year-old girl was seizing in a hospital bed and her mother needed help. That's the story. If anyone prints anything else, that's on them, not me. It doesn't matter what actually happened, Alexander. It matters what it looks like. The board is uncomfortable. Some members are asking whether personal instability is starting to affect. Careful, Richard. The line went quiet. Alexander had never used that tone with him before. It surprised them both. But the pressure didn't stop there. That evening, Maria received a call of her own, from a woman claiming to represent a tabloid, offering a significant sum of money for her side of the story, implying things about her relationship with her employer that made Maria's stomach turn. She hung up immediately, hands shaking, and sat in the small cottage kitchen staring at Lily, now resting peacefully after a full day back home, wondering if her job, her livelihood, the roof over her daughter's head, was about to be destroyed by a single night she'd never asked to become public. She showed up at the main house the next morning intending to resign before she could be fired, to spare Alexander the headache her presence in his life had apparently caused. She found him in the study, the same room where the whole night had begun, looking like a man who hadn't slept, not from exhaustion this time, but from something closer to resolve. I came to hand in my notice, Maria said quietly, not quite meeting his eyes. I think it's better for everyone if I... Sit down, Maria. Sir, I really think... Sit down. Please. She sat, tense, bracing for the conversation she was certain was coming. The polite dismissal, the generous severance dressed up as kindness. Instead, Alexander slid a folder across the desk toward her. I called the board this morning, he said. I told them that if anyone has a problem with the fact that I chose to help a sick child instead of protecting a press narrative, they can bring it to a vote, and I will personally buy out every share of anyone who votes against me. Richard Voss will not be chairman by next quarter. Maria stared at him, speechless. And that, he continued, nodding at the folder, is a formal offer, full medical coverage for you and Lily, a raise, and a private education fund set up in her name, effective immediately. Not because of what happened with the press. Because 2 nights ago I remembered what it feels like to actually be alive, and I have you and your daughter to thank for that. Maria opened the folder with trembling hands, tears already threatening again. She'd cried more in the last 48 hours than in the previous year combined, and looked up at him, searching his face for the catch, the condition, the thing men like him always wanted in return. There wasn't one. Why? She finally asked. Why would you do all this for us? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his own hands, the same hands that had held Lily's small fingers through the longest night of his life. Because your daughter asked me if I was her friend, he said. And for the first time in 6 years, I actually wanted to say yes and mean it. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you, Maria. I'm doing it because somewhere between midnight and dawn 2 nights ago, you and Lily reminded me I'm still capable of caring about someone. I'd almost forgotten that. He paused, and something in his expression shifted. Softer, more uncertain than the boardroom version of himself she'd grown used to. "There's something else," he added quietly. "Something I found out this morning, going through old paperwork I haven't touched in years. I think you should sit down for this part too." Maria frowned. "I'm sitting down." "Right," Alexander said, and for the first time that week, something that almost resembled a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Then I think it's time I told you about Ellie's middle name." Maria didn't understand at first. Her middle name. Alexander reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a small, worn photograph. One Maria had never seen before, tucked behind a folder he clearly hadn't opened willingly in a long time. A little girl with dark curls, laughing at the camera, held in the arms of a woman with a familiar, gentle smile. "My late wife's name was Sophia," he said quietly. "Our daughter's full name was Eleanor Sophia Cole. Everyone called her Ellie." He turned the photo toward Maria. "The nurse who admitted Lily 2 nights ago, Nurse Alvarez, she processed the records this morning while I was signing discharge paperwork. She mentioned something in passing that I couldn't stop thinking about. Lily's full name. Lily Sofia Delgado." Maria's breath caught. "It's a common name," Alexander said gently, watching her face. "I know that. I'm not telling you this because I think it means something mystical, some sign from the universe. I don't believe in that, not really. I'm telling you because when Nurse Alvarez said it, something in me that had been closed for 6 years finally cracked all the way open, instead of just a little. I sat in that hospital chair holding your daughter's hand, and for the first time since I buried mine, it didn't feel like betrayal to let myself feel something for a child again. It felt like healing." Maria was crying now, openly, but not from sorrow. "I had no idea," she whispered. "I named her after my grandmother, Sophia was." "I know. It's not fate, Maria. It's just life, doing something strange and kind at exactly the moment I needed it to." He set the photograph down carefully between them. "I spent 6 years building walls so high nobody could reach me, punishing myself for a night I couldn't have changed no matter how many times I replayed it. And then a little girl with a fever and my daughter's middle name reached out and grabbed my hand in a hospital room, and every single one of those walls came down in about 11 hours. He looked at Maria, really looked at her, the way he hadn't let himself look at another person in years, and continued. "I'm not asking you for anything, and I'm not offering you charity. I'm asking if you'd let me actually be part of your daughter's life. Not as her mother's employer. As whatever I've already become to her these last 2 days. Her friend, if that's what she wants to call me. And maybe, in time, if you're comfortable with it, something more, for both of us." The offer hung in the air, honest and unpolished in a way none of Alexander's carefully worded press releases ever were. 3 months later, the story had changed entirely from the one the tabloids first printed. Cole Global's board, minus Richard Voss, who resigned quietly after failing to gather enough votes against a CEO the public had, remarkably, come to adore rather than criticize once the full story came out, announced the launch of the Ellie Cole Pediatric Fund, a multimillion-dollar initiative to cover emergency childhood medical costs for families who couldn't otherwise afford them. Alexander funded it personally, insisting every dollar trace back to families like Maria's, who'd been one bad night away from losing everything. Lily, fully recovered and as loud and joyful as ever, had taken to calling Alexander Uncle Alex without anyone teaching her to, and spent her afternoons helping the gardener catch ladybugs in jars just outside the window Alexander no longer felt the need to keep closed. Maria still worked at the estate, though her title and everything else about her life there had changed beyond recognition. She and Alexander were taking things slowly, deliberately, the way 2 people who'd each survived their own kind of heartbreak learned to trust again. Not with grand gestures, but with small, steady ones. Dinner some evenings. A hand held without needing an emergency to justify it. A door, once locked for 6 years, now standing open down the hall, Ellie's old nursery, repainted, its shelves now holding some of Lily's favorite books, a quiet, gentle way of letting one small girl's memory make room for another's laughter instead of being erased by it. The final twist of this story was never really the headline, or the fortune, or even the matching middle name that first cracked Alexander's heart back open. It was simpler than that. It was the truth that sometimes the person you're most afraid to let close is the one who was sent to remind you that you're still capable of love, and that even the coldest, most guarded hearts can find their way back to warmth if someone is patient enough and brave enough to stay through the night. The lesson here is simple. Grief can close a heart for years, but it only takes one act of genuine, unguarded compassion to begin opening it again. Sometimes the family we're searching for isn't the one we lost. It's the one waiting quietly for us to notice it, right in front of us. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what part hit you hardest, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. We've got so many more stories like this coming. Make sure you're here for it. See you in the next video.